The tension in the room was thick enough to be cut with a knife. You paced back and forth, your mind racing as you replayed the argument from earlier. It had started over a disagreement, over a strategy, how to approach the next game. But it quickly got much more personal. Words were exchanged and tempers flared, and Thanos had stormed out, leaving you fuming and hurt. Now later, the anger had dulled, replaced by a gnawing guilt. You hated fighting with him. Despite his stoic exterior, you knew he cared deeply for you, and the idea of him sitting alone, stewing in frustration, made your chest ache. You glanced at the small bag tucked under the cot. It was a luxury, something you'd managed to sneak in after one of the earlier games, a rare indulgence in this grim, unforgiving place. You hadn't planned on revealing it so soon, but desperate times came for desperate measures. Taking a big, deep breath, you reached in the bag. The knock on the door of Thanos' makeshift quarters was tentative, almost uncertain. Inside, he sat on the edge of his cot, his head in his hands. The argument had left him on edge, his usual calm shattered by the harshness of his own words. He hadn't meant to snap at you. In truth, he was scared, terrified even. Every day in this place felt like a countdown, and the thought of losing you in one of the games was a fear that he just couldn't shake. But instead of admitting that he had lashed out, his frustration masking the vulnerability he so rarely showed. When the knock came again, he frowned, his ears twitching slightly, rising to his feet as he crossed the room and opened the door, expecting to see one of the guards or maybe a contestant. Instead, he saw you. For a moment, he just stared, his amber eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was low but not unkind. You shifted nervously, your fingers clutching the edge of the blanket you draped over your shoulders. "I just want to talk," you said, your voice softer than he was used to. "About earlier," you clarified. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "There's nothing to talk about. I said what I needed to say." "And I didn't?" You shot back, though your tone lacked the usual bite it had earlier. Thanos sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Wyan, I don't want to fight with you." "Good," you said, stepping past him into the room. "Because I'm not here to fight." He turned, watching as you moved to the center of the room. There was something different about you, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. I shouldn't have snapped at you," you began, your eyes meeting his. I know that you're trying to protect me, and I appreciate that. I do, but I need you to trust me. I'm not helpless." Thanos frowned, his gaze softening as he took your words in. "I never said you were," he responded. "No, but you act like it," you said, your voice trembling. And I get it. I'm scared. You're scared, but we're in this together, and if we're going to survive, we need to trust each other." He was silent for a moment, the weight of your words sinking in. Finally, he just nodded. "You're right," he admitted. I don't know what I'd do if something ever happened to you." Your heart ached at the rawness in his voice. Taking a step closer, you reached out, your fingers brushing against his arm. "Nothing's going to happen to me," you said softly. "Not if we have each other's back." He looked down at you. His expression was unreadable. Then, to your surprise, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You're too stubborn for anything to happen to you." You laughed, the sound breaking the tension that had hung between you two. "Takes one to know one," you shot back. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Fair enough." For a moment, the two of you stood there, the argument forgotten as a comfortable silence had settled between you two. But then you took a step back, a mischievous glint in your eye. "Now," you said, your voice light and teasing. "Since we're making up, I thought I'd do something special." Thanos raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Special?" You nodded, your fingers gripping the edge of the blanket draped over your shoulders. "You'll see," you said, your tone playful. "But you'll have to promise not to laugh. He tilted his head, a faint smirk playing on his lips. I'm not much of a laugher, Ryan. Good, you said, your cheeks warming despite your bravo. Because this is a little under my comfort zone. With that, you let the blanket slip from your shoulders, revealing the secret that you'd been hiding. Thanos' eyes widened, his usual calm shattering as he took in the sight before him. The room fell silent as the blanket pulled at your feet, dropping with a small thud, revealing the surprise you'd been hiding. There you stood, clad in a delicate lingerie that contrasted starkly with a grim, horrible surroundings of the barricades. The soft fabric clung to your body in all the right places, the intricate design accentuating your figure in a way that left little to the imagination. Thanos froze, his amber eyes widening as they roamed over you, his usual stoic crackling under the weight of his surprise. For a moment you weren't sure if he'd say anything at all. Well? You asked nervously, your voice barely above a whisper. What do you think? He blinked as if snapping out of a trance. His gaze shot to you, and for the first time since you'd met him, you saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his eyes. When you shifted under the intense stare, feeling equal parts vulnerable and exhilarated. It's not much, you said quickly, filling the silence with a cough. I just thought, after earlier, I wanted to do something to make it up for you, to show you how much you mean to me. Thanos' jaw tightened. He took a slow step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. The sheer size of him made the distance between you and him almost feel non-existent. When he finally stopped in front of you, he hesitated, his hand hovering in the air as if he was afraid to touch you. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice low and rough, the tension in his tone making your breath hitch. I wanted to, you replied, beating his gaze. I wanted to show you that I trust you, that I care about you. His eyes softened, though the intensity behind them remained. Slowly he reached out, his fingers brushing gently against the delicate strap on your shoulder. The touch was feather light, as if he was afraid of breaking you, and it sent a shiver down your spine. You're beautiful, he murmured, the words slipping out before he could even stop them. Your heart skipped at the raw honesty in his voice. You're just saying that, you giggled. He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. I'm not. You are. The sincerity in his tone made your cheeks flush, and you couldn't help but smile. You don't look too bad yourself, you teased, trying to lighten the mood. Thanos smirked, his confidence returning as he stepped closer. I didn't think you could surprise me, but you've outdone yourself, he sighed. You laughed softly, the tension easing as his hand moved to rest on your waist. The warmth of his palm seeped through the fabric, grounding you in the moment. I thought you'd be mad, you admitted. After the fight, I wasn't sure this would work. Mad? He raised an eyebrow, his other hand coming up to rest on your hip. How could I be mad when you look like this? The words sent a rush of heat through you. You swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close he was. The air between the two of you seemed to crackle with energy, the unspoken tension pulling you closer. You're not just saying that to make me feel better, are you? You asked, your voice barely above a whisper. Thanos chuckled. The sound was deep and rich. Do I look like someone who says things just to make people feel better? He shifted his head, making his purple hair flick out of his eyes a little bit. You couldn't help but laugh at the sound, breaking the spell just for a moment. Fair point. He smiled, the expression softer than you'd ever seen it. I meant what I said, Wayne. You don't need to do anything to prove anything to me. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't appreciate it. His hands tightened slightly on your waist, his touch was firm but gentle. You could still feel the strength in him, the barely contained restraint as he held himself back. You don't have to hold back, he said softly, your eyes searching his. His gaze darkened, his smirking fading into his expression turned serious. I don't want to hurt you. You won't, you assured him, your hands moving to rest against his chest. I trust you, Thanos. The words seemed to snap something in him. His grip tightened, pulling you closer until your bodies were pressed against each other. The heat radiating from him was almost overwhelming, but he didn't pull away. Instead, you locked, your head up, your eyes tilted to his, as the space between the two of you disappeared. For a moment, you thought he might kiss you. His face was so close to yours. His breath was warm against your skin, and the intensity of his eyes made your knees weak. But he didn't move, his restraint holding strong even as the tension between the two of you grew and grew and grew unbearable. Ryan, he said. His voice was a low rumble and it sent shivers down your spine. You have no idea what you're doing to me right now. Maybe I do, you replied, voice trembling, but steady enough to meet his gaze. Maybe that's the point. His lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile breaking, though his resolve. You're playing a very dangerous game. Only if you let me win, you teased, fingers curling against his chest. Thanos' laughter was genuine, the sound vibrating through you as he leaned closer. You think you've already won, don't you? Maybe, you said. He chuckled again, as a small smile played against your lips, his forehead pressed against yours. He let out a long, slow breath. God, you're impossible, you know that? Impossible to resist? You asked, grinning. He'd pulled back just enough to meet your eyes, his expression softer now. But the intensity still lingered. Something like that, he said quietly. The moment stretched on, the tension was giving way to something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. For the first time, it felt like the walls you both built around yourselves were crumbling, leaving you exposed but somehow stronger. I'm not going anywhere, you said softly, fingers brushing against his jaw. Good, he replied, his voice steady, because neither am I. The air between the two of you felt electric, but the anticipation was building once again. Before either of you can do anything, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment, pulling you both to reality. Thanos frowned, his hand still on your waist as he turned towards the door. What now? He muttered, his voice laced with annoyance. You sighed, stepping back reluctantly as the spell was broken. I guess we'll find out. The knock came again, louder. This time you exchanged a glance with Thanos. Whatever waited on the other side of that door couldn't have been good news. Thanos' gaze lingered on you for a moment longer, as if reluctant to let the moment end. The knock on the door grew more insistent, pulling his attention away. He turned towards you, with a low growl, his hand slipping from your waist as you bent down to pull up the blanket once again to hide your bare body. Stay here, he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. You nodded, watching as he crossed the room with a few long strides. His posture was tense, his body radiating frustration as he slammed the door open, just enough to see who was on the other side. What? He snapped, his tone sharper than usual. Whoever it was mumbled something you couldn't hear. Thanos' expression darkened, his jaw clenching as he nodded curtly and stepped back. Give me a minute, he said, his tone clipped as he shut the door, before turning back to you, his shoulders tight with tension. What's coming on? You asked, stepping closer. Another game, he muttered, his eyes looking over you briefly. They're gathering everyone. The reality of your situation came crashing down, the fragile bubble you'd created bursting within an instant. You nodded, reaching for the blanket to cover yourself. I'll be ready, you said, trying to sound confident, but the settling of unease was in your chest. Thanos crossed the room, his hands gently cupping your shoulders. Ryan, we'll get through this. Just stay close to me. And no arguments this time. And with that, the two of you stepped into the unknown once again, side by side.